And Delisha, I mentioned earlier when I was letting you in from the waiting room, if you all could take a moment to introduce yourselves, because we have such an amazing panel of speakers today that I want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to state who you are, where you're from, and which association you or university you're associated with.
Sure, I think we build it into our presentation here, but we can take a quick second. I'm Delisha Davis, project manager with the University of Minnesota. Been in this work for 6 years and doing the diversity subcommittee work for about 3, almost 4 of those years. And so my partners here and I connected a few years ago at UW-Madison during a conference there. And that's kind of how some of the things we're going to talk about here today have come to fruition. So excited to be here. I recognize a lot of the names, some of the names here, and hopefully you find you all.
That's all I wanted to.
I think I'll hand it over to you, Amy.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Freidig. I've had a position change that I haven't been too vocal about since October. I am now a statewide horticulture outreach specialist for the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension, but I still have Master Gardener duties, if you will, largely in the educational realm. And I'll pass it over to Kate. And I will say, we'll introduce our very special guest in just a couple minutes. So.
Congratulations, Amy. I'm so excited for you. I'm Kate Garland with a frog in her throat. I'm a horticulture professional with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and I'll talk more about my background when it's my time to speak.
Awesome. Are we gonna dive right in here? Are we ready, Nicole?
We're ready.
Awesome. So again, thank you all for being present with us. Like Amy mentioned, we'll introduce our very special partners in just a moment here. Wanted to just kind of give you all an overview of the information we cover here today. Best practices for REG data collection, as you all know, race, ethnicity, and gender data collection, which is required by USD regulations for any institution, of course, that receives federal assistance. And all, I'm sure, of our institutions receive some sort of federal assistance. So just as a way of discovering, well, not discovering, kind of capturing and of course, gauging how well benefits and services are being delivered in the communities that we intend to serve. And here's a screenshot there of the diversity, equity, and best practices document that has been in the works for the last couple of years. Some of you may know kind of the history behind it, but the DEI subcommittee, namely a few specific members of the subcommittee, have worked very hard in getting this developed and partnering also with USDA-NIFA, who is represented here with us today. It's available now, woohoo, finally, on the resource repository as a resource for everyone nationally to be able to have access to. You'll want to look under, you can probably see that a little well on my screen, but you'll want to look under templates, and then there are 3 separate documents to note there. So glad that we finally were able to get it finalized and loaded there. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, specific members of the DEI subcommittee were instrumental in developing those best practices and making them available to our partners in the Extension Master Gardener program nationwide. So Kate Garland, who will speak in a moment, thank you for gracing us with your presence. I think you noted that Amy should be at the top, and she really should, because her and Jan were kind of at the forefront of this and a lot of the work that began with this document and these best practices a couple of years ago. Vanessa Venturini, I don't know if she's here. I didn't see if she was here or not, and all the names that are on Zoom, but thank you so much, Vanessa. Myself kind of playing a quiet role in the background, helping to guide some things along. Missy Gable, the UC Davis out in California, Marissa Coyne, I believe that's how you say your last name, Ava Pavone, University of Florida, the rest of our subcommittee members, and of course, Drenda Williams. Thank you so much for joining us here today to share your piece and partnering with us as a representative of NIFA to get this information out to our partners here at Extension. Just a quick another note or two here. In using the best practices document, it's the what, not the how. So really the what we'll say, or we like to identify as kind of how a reminder, how you do, not well, how your your individual programs will work towards your DEI goals, but what you do to kind of get there. And it's structured by the life cycle of, a Master Gardener program. We know that how that works. And what you'll want to do ultimately is consult with your specific institution regarding state or other institution specific requirements. With that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Amy. Ready to take it away?
Yep, as long as you can advance the slides. Thank you, Delisha. So I would like to take a moment today to introduce a very special guest. We have with us in the Zoom room, Drenda Williams, the USDA-NIFA Director of Equal Opportunity Staff and the NIFA Civil Rights Director. Drenda is here to answer our questions about REG data collection. She's also provided a review of the documents that we're referencing throughout today. And we are really so thrilled that she could join us because this is a pretty unique and wonderful opportunity to get your questions answered, many of which were pre-submitted. We asked via a survey from all of you if you had any questions, and you did. So we're going to hear from Drenda in a few minutes, but I really wanted to take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude for this collaboration. And I'm going to put Drenda's bio in the chat so that you can take a look at it and get to know her background in areas of expertise. There it goes. So before we launch into the Q&A, we're just real briefly going to go over part of the suite of best practices documents that you can access on the resource site. And what we're going to focus on today is to start out with is something that we on the team that developed this found really enlightening. So that is, again, another little screenshot. This is the part of the best practices document we're going to focus on today called the do's and don'ts of REG data collection. And in particular, where the little arrow green there, the green arrow in the formatting transfer didn't work. That green arrow is supposed to be pointing to the blue highlighted link there. That links to specific examples of extension outreach activities and whether or not you need to collect REG data at them. So you have access to all this. You can look at it live if you wish. These are all available as they're nested documents, but they're available on the resource site as separate documents should you like to look at it. So if you could advance it one more time, Felicia. So this is a screenshot of the table that I referenced. Again, it contains these quintessential extension outreach activities, and it provides information about whether or not you need to collect REG data or not. So Kate's going to go through these activities to get you thinking about data collection. And as we go, if you have some specific questions about what we're talking about, put them in the chat box and Ashley will jump in and read them out loud and Drenda can comment on them. And then we're going to wrap it up with some Q&A with Drenda and including reading as many of the pre-submitted questions as we can get through in our hour. So I'll hand it over to Kate now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, we have a lot to go through, so this is very exciting. My name is, again, Kate Garland. I'm a horticulture professional with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And I wanted to start by giving a little bit of background on my role in Extension and how I got involved on this topic, actually. I support home and community and school gardeners in Penobscot and Aroostook counties. They're kind of the larger counties towards the top and central part of the state of Maine. So I love that image there. Like many new extension staffers, I was completely, actually, could you go one? Thank you. Like many new extension staffers, I was completely new to the concept of collecting race, ethnicity, and gender information when I started back in 2011. And thankfully, I'm so grateful to the many colleagues that I had along the way who provided a lot of guidance on not only helping me understand the expectations regarding collecting REG data, but practical real life ways of actually meeting those expectations. So, really how to collect that information. And in my conversations with others from around the nation, however, I noticed that not everyone had those resources or mentoring available to them in their institutions. And that inspired me to get involved with this project. So while I still have loads of questions, and I'm sure there are even better ways than I am sharing with you today on how to collect REG information, I hope you'll be able to glean some good information, some helpful tips to improve the process in which you meet your very important federal reporting requirements, and also be able to use this information how we're supposed to use it to carefully assess the inclusivity and accessibility of our programs. So if you have tips and tricks to share, I highly encourage you to put them in the chat as we go along. I selfishly am doing this to get ideas from you too, and you're a creative bunch, so I'm sure there's going to be tips and tricks along the way, and of course put those questions in too. So Drenda, yes, Delisha, the next slide, thank you. I'll start with the scenarios where you don't need to collect race, ethnicity, and gender information, and some of them you might be surprised or quite frankly relieved to see. Because I know I've always struggled with how do I collect REG information with these situations. So our newsletter recipients, we don't need to collect race, ethnicity, or gender information there. Social media contacts, phone contacts, like someone calling in for diagnostics on a moldy tomato, any of our email contacts, and one-on-one contacts at a public event. So such as like a informational table at a county fair. Next slide. It's more no's actually. So in-person office contacts, we actually don't need to collect race, ethnicity, and gender information there. Same with our visitors to websites and visitors to demonstration gardens as well. So in-person office contacts is not referring to a program participant per se. This means someone that comes in and asks a question about a garden issue or program, and you're helping them in person. And for demonstration gardens, the audience here is unmonitored. So this does not include visitors that are to the demonstration gardens that are participating in scheduled programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Did the slide deck disappear for you as well?
Yes, it disappeared.
Yes.
I'm not seeing Delisha.
I can bring it back up.
Yeah, why don't you bring it up, Nicole?
Nicole.
Yeah. You're welcome. Hang on just a moment.
So I'll just talk a little bit more about the next slide, which is webinar participants. I know a lot of you are putting on webinars, and so we are expected to collect REG information about that. And so, this is a public-facing educational outreach effort. So pictured here is actually a screenshot of a webinar that we partnered with UNH on. And in each webinar, we started by sharing the Injustice for All poster. And we have the moderator at the same time share a demographic survey in the chat. And that actually is shared a few times throughout the webinar, just to kind of keep it on their radar and inspire them to actually click on it maybe and fill that out. And we have a really helpful script to introduce the Injustice for All poster. So we're consistent and clear with the message regarding the intent of that poster. Another approach that can be done in addition to this is to share the survey. Share the survey in a follow-up correspondence with the participants as well. So you're really making lots of efforts to really get them to click on that link and fill out that information. So those are definitely reasonable approaches when registration's not required. where, if you could move to the next slide, please. Where registration is handled by extension, one could collect demographic information during the registration process, as is shown here. So early on in my career, I wondered about whether that was an issue to have the demographic information linked directly to the individual and whether that was a concern versus it being anonymous. But it's my understanding that it is okay to do that and collect that information directly in the registration process. And next slide, please. And Drenda, I welcome you to correct me if I'm misspeaking in any way, and I won't be offended. So I hope you're taking notes and can adjust me to the right course after the fact here. Or even during, I welcome you to unmute and chime in. So for this one is multi-session program. So if you have any educational program, I'm sorry, oops, I lost where I was here. Yeah, if you have sessions where you have multi-sessions where people are hopping on and registering in advance, such as our mentor request program, where people are seeking the help of master gardeners and being matched with master gardeners. You can collect information, reg information then, or we can do that in a follow-up email, like when you're trying to assess the success of the program and you're asking them to fill out information related to that. You can ask for reg information then at the same time. Okay, so.
Kate, can we take a quick second to answer a few questions from Drenda on this topic, or would you like us to wait to the end? Okay.
From Drenda?
For Drenda, yeah, related to these specific requirements. One person is asking, is it still anonymous if we collect information during registration?
Yeah, that's what I was going to wait to respond to. I'm assuming that the registration is like an email link that people receive and they're completing it themselves and then it's stored somewhere else. So the issue would be the storage of the data. Are you storing it with their name and their address and things like that? Because again, the REG data is just for data analysis. And one thing we see in civil rights is that if you keep it together, people can say that they are being discriminated against or adversely treated because of their race, ethnicity, or gender. And it's tied to their name if you're collecting it like that. So that's the thing. If you're collecting it and they're putting it in, how is the information being stored? Do you pull it out? Like if it's collected in a database or spreadsheet, you pull that demographic information out from the registration and store it separately? Or are you keeping it with the name's address, and contact information?
So the logistics, it would basically mean that you would have to have a separate form for reg information, that a separate link that they would have to click on to get to the reg information. So it does land in a virtually separate spot.
Yeah, and I know ideally that might be inefficient, but again, like I said, you don't want it to look like you're utilizing reg data to make determinations about program participation or any other type of thing. So that's the best thing to do to kind of eliminate that.
Okay. So like an online form, it couldn't be within the same form itself because it would all land in the same back-end spreadsheet type information, and you couldn't separate it out after the fact necessarily.
And if you're collecting it like that and you're moving it out after the fact, I think that's a gray area where it's still, as long as the permanent storage isn't with the PII, the name, the address and things, I think there's some flexibility where that could be acceptable, but you just want to make sure it's not stored like that as the permanent record.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Ashley, did you have another one that was right in the moment?
Related to that, could non-program staff remove the reg data from spreadsheet registrations?
Really, whoever has access to the reg data, it should be very limited because again, you're allowing people to see what other people identify as. So if they're not program staff, give me an example of what relationship that person would be looking at the REG data. Can somebody give me an example? Oh, support staff that are not.
That would be my assumption, is that they're probably thinking of support staff that might be like handling name tags, for example, or I don't know, packets.
Yeah, like I would say, I would make it very limited, because again, that opens you up to complaints. So let's say somebody's separating it out or looking at the information and someone feels like they're being treated unfairly in a program activity. Then when it comes to investigations of those type of things, they're going to say, well, who had access to the data, you know, and all of that. So you want to make sure that you minimize the risk of exposing that to others, which is why you keep it separate, no names. You know, that's the best practice.
Learning along the way, very much so. Great. Ashley, do you want me to just keep?
I should keep going. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can have the next slide, please. Okay, so we do collect this information for our volunteer groups during their enrollment process and re-enrollment process as well. And so we may need to do a separate link here as well, where we have our enrollment form, and then we have an additional a link to a separate survey. So their reg information goes there. Is that, am I understanding that correctly, Drenda?
Yes, and I know Jessica may have provided some guidance. I know we got, maybe people are using iPads for registration and asking if it's okay to accept it there, which it is. But like I said, when it comes to the permanent storage, so if you're completing the registration form and the program staff is separating that out in another spreadsheet at the end of registration, then it wouldn't be a problem. But if it's stored together and kept like that as the permanent record, I would recommend adding a link.
Okay. Great. Could I have the next slide, please? So for face-to-face workshops, what we do here is you can see a picture of one of our ballot boxes that I purchased a while ago. And we provide a little incentive, free seeds. Oftentimes I have a volunteer that does a great job soliciting free seeds at the end of the season. And you wouldn't believe, even splitting one of those packets of radish seeds into like little coin envelopes, if you don't have a lot of free seeds, just a small little handful can get people over there to fill out the demographic cards. And we use like a little postcard size one. And the ballot box kind of gives the feel of anonymous participation too. So I think that helps with the comfort level. So anything that you can do to incentivize pulling people in that direction. I feel like we may have missed a slide, but we can jump to this one for right now. So this is an example of those supporting food security agencies by offering programming and donating produce. So more formal pantries, we are expected to collect reg data from both of those. Oops, can you sneak back? We're expected to collect reg data from all food security organizations that we support. And I know that more formal food pantries are often able to share demographic information for those they serve, because they're often required to keep track of that information in order to report to their stakeholders. But I definitely would love to learn more about what reg data collection efforts would look like in more informal food donation sites, and whether it's necessary to gather that information from those stopping by and grabbing a head of cabbage. Is that type of interaction something we need to collect reg data for, or do we need to have the ballot box thing out? So I'm selfishly asking that question, because as I was building this site, I was like, well, if we are required to do that, really, what does it look like? And so I'll leave that there. Can we go back a couple slides? I feel like we may have missed a slide or two. Is there one about school gardens? Okay, so schools. A lot of you work with schools. Can you go forward just a little bit? Okay. So schools, there's a lot of folks that work with school gardens, and basically we are required to ask for or gather REG information from anyone who's benefiting from the garden. And there's a lot of room for interpretation here. So it might not be clear and super cut and dry as to who should be counted. But once you've determined your audience, it's my understanding that it's not recommended that we collect REG information from the students or even the teacher directly, but instead work with the school administrator to gather that information from their enrollment records. As that information is based on self-reporting that's done by the parents. So, pictured here on the right-hand side is a 4-H group enrollment that we could ask, for example, the school support staff to complete based on their enrollment records for the specific classes that we're working with. And again, Drenda, please chime in if I'm off track on any of that. Does that sound about right as far as
Yes, you are correct. And the reason why is it came up where someone was doing an extension program at a school and they were collecting REG data from the students. So we had a legal opinion from the Office of General Counsel, and they recommended that the best practice would be to have the guardian or parent complete the REG information. And so that way, if there's no like parent consent or something like that, then you would go to the school and get the demographic information like you had shown before, so that we're not violating anything in regards to asking minors for data that would be sent to the government.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. I think I may have gotten through the slides. I think they disappeared again. But Amy, you know the slides pretty well. So did I hit all the highlights here?
I think so. And if we miss anything, you can always check out that table. I would really encourage you to sit with that for a while and just go through it. And I am positive that people will have additional questions, but you may need some time to filter it through your own particular situation. But it's a unique resource to just give you some grounding in where you are in the world and what you may need to do or change. We do have a few more questions here in the chat, but I'd like to I would like to, because some people did take the time to pre-submit some questions, so I'd like to go through a couple of those. So Drenda, if you'd be happy to unmute, this is the first one. The current gender options are not inclusive, and we consistently get feedback that people feel excluded. Will these gender options be revised soon? How can we address the issue of people who feel excluded by the current options?
Yes, and I've been working since I've been at NIFA in regards to the 802106 form, which is how we collect demographic data and the categories being non-inclusive. So I've submitted it. I've just submitted it recently again, asking for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights to work to modify those and make more categories that are inclusive. And so once that has been done, and if you'll see it in the Federal Register, where there's comment periods of which categories are added and those type of things. And then the Office of Management and Budget will approve those, then we'll send it out. But I say in the meantime, what we've been authorized to do is that you can always add an option for a person to put in what they actually identify as. And so that would help us go back and say, okay, we have these programs, these federally assisted programs, and here is the demographic information that's of the actual participants, and it's not listed on the form, but here are the categories that we've collected, to try to assist in us requesting additional categories. So they did offer that opportunity. So if someone doesn't identify as anything on that form, they can add in, they can write in the form, or if you have developed your own form, make sure there's a place for them to add in something if it's not there, so that you can submit that to our office as well. We want to make sure that we're giving them an opportunity to identify, even if it's not listed on that form.
Thank you, Drenda. And I did see in the chat, someone said they had a similar question, but about race. So I think if you can comment on
yeah, categories. So it's the same thing about the categories. It's very it's not inclusive. And so again, whether it's race, ethnicity, or gender, we always want individuals to identify what they are. And if it's not listed, they can write in what it actually is. And we ask that the program staff collect that and send that to us, when we request it, so that we can say, again, here's the facts about the categories on the form are not inclusive. And here's what we're seeing out in regards to program participation, to kind of help us push them to modify the form. But it's coming. I don't want you all to get discouraged. It is coming, because if you look at the current administration's executive orders, and there's a lot of them on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So it'll be coming. It's just a matter of when.
Great, thank you. Next pre-submitted, and then maybe Ashley can chime in with something from the chat. We collect non-discrimination sign-offs from our volunteers and community partners using Google Forms. Is this an approved method, or do we need to use paper copies? We print the spreadsheet from the Google form for our records.
No, that's fine. An electronic method is fine. The biggest thing is making sure that you're communicating the written assurances of any, subrecipients or partners, and showing that everybody understands what the requirement is for non-discrimination. So that's fine.
Thank you. Ashley, can you follow up with the chat?
Can you clarify the reasoning behind why we wouldn't need to collect reg data from one-on-one contacts like phone calls?
So that would be, in my old NRCS days, technical assistance. It's like a technical assistance contact. Even though you're talking to a person maybe about a program, or maybe it's a program participant that had a question, again, it's a technical assistance or outreach activity. So you would only count the number, not ask for reg information.
And could we conduct a poll during the webinar to collect reg data?
That's good, as long as it's anonymous.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
All right. Great. This is a pre-submitted question. How can we collect reg data without doing visual observation, for example, in the context of farmers markets or plant clinics? And are there forms we can display?
Okay, so in regards to farmers market, I don't know if you all want to, I think that outreach, what's an outreach event versus a program where we collect reg data, that's the determining factor. So that's what I would look at the table to see if it's actually if we're supposed to collect reg data. And if so, then you would do a form. Again, we'd ask that it be separate from any registration stuff if it's manual, like a hard copy form. But if it's electronic, like we had talked about before, you might want to add a separate link, or in the storage, separate it out.
Thank you,
And
Drenda. And I think tied into that, I'm going to tie this one in. Well, I think if you could comment on, because I know some states may still have some discussion over whether or not you can do any visual identification for reg data collection. So if you could comment on that, so everyone, I'm sure everyone would like to hear it from you.
That's the part I missed. Thank you. The question, and I actually put in the chat the link. The link is the actual, the Office of Management Budget came up with the standards for collecting this information. So they are specific in regards to how the government should receive the data. And in there, it says it should be self-identified. It said only in cases like in the event of death where the person can't identify, but we're not asking for that type of information. So that's basically why you can't look at it. And in plain language, that means, you can't look at a person visually and determine what they are. Again, plain language is like, if you see me, you're making an assumption about what race I am or what gender I am based on visual characteristics. And that's not how I may identify. So that's why it's always best for the person to say how they identify. We don't want to tell somebody what they are. We want the person to tell us what they identify as. And so that's why you don't visually do it. One, it's an assumption of what someone is. Two, it could be an unconscious bias of what you're classifying them as. And three, it's not always accurate. So you want to make sure they identify with what they want versus what we want them to be, or what we think they are.
Thank you. I'll do one more and then we'll have one from a live chat. All right, what is a reasonable response rate to expect?
In regards to if you're asking someone to complete REG data, is that what? I'm sorry.
I think so, yeah. So what,
I'm trying to think. So like if you're, let's say if you're sending something out and there's a deadline on there, and if it's not in by the deadline or a few days after, I wouldn't wait too long. I would, if you sent, let's say a separate REG form out with a deadline and that deadline has passed, I would count those as do not wish to disclose because they haven't gotten back. If people want you to know how they classify, they'll send it back. You know, so I would say that would be the gauge. The response date is a deadline. Or let's say you're at a meeting and you have the REG form out, you know, you have it and you announced it at a break, it's toward the end of the meeting, you know, at the end of the meeting, if nobody has, you know, provided their information, they're not going to. So that's what I would use to gauge the response rate. You don't want to keep following up with someone if they haven't, you know, if they haven't submitted it. Because again, if people want to respond, they'll respond by in a timely manner according to a deadline or during the actual face-to-face activity.
But and I remember you talking about this, Drenda, but the thing that we need to remember is that it's not that we would like all the information we can get, but it's the offer. That's what really, you know, that on our end, that's all we can do and that we have offered. If you could comment on that real quick. So folks.
Yeah, and that's really important because I know when our staff comes out to do the compliance and we ask for program participation, we ask you that in the document request and your numbers might not be as high as reflective to the populations. We're not going to say or penalize you for that. It's just, you know, what outreach methods or what ways of communication did you do to try to collect the REG data or to reach the people? It's just like you said, the effort that's being put forth. And even if, let's say the data comes back where you're not, you know, you have a low participation of Hispanics in the programs. It's not like NIFA is going to come back and say, oh, we're going to take your funding or something like that. We're going to say, well, let's look and see where the populations are at. How can we work together to come up with some strategies to increase our outreach, you know, efforts and things like that. So it's not about, you know, looking at the number, like just the numbers, or looking at the diversity of the groups that you are actually, who you actually have in the program. It's more about what has been done to try to reach them. And sometimes you're not going to reach populations. They might not want to participate. They might not be interested. They might not have time, but at least, you know, you all have tried and communicated about what's available to the community. So that's what's the most important.
I have another question from the chat. Can data be collected months after the event? For example, we collect emails and send out an anonymous year-end survey with REG data collection or REG data questions.
Repeat that because I thought I heard at the end of the year. Is that?
Yeah, it says, for example, we collect emails and send out an anonymous year-end survey. Yeah, with REG data questions.
It would just depend. Because I'm thinking that you have activities and programs throughout the year. And so maybe, and tell me if I'm wrong, maybe a person might participate in one program, but not another. And it's important to see if there are certain programs that different demographics participate in and certain programs they don't. So I would say if you could do it close to the actual event, and then you could still add it to the end of the year. But I feel like if you're just doing it at one time, you might be missing something in the data that could help you.
Drenda, I have one that this question we've already kind of answered, but I think it's worded in a really important way. So the question is as follows. The guidelines say data will be self-reported or self-identified by the respondent. Can you please confirm that this means that at no point in time can we report any REG information that hasn't been shared directly by the individual in a written or electronic format? In other words, we are never allowed to rely on visual assessment of program participants in order to assess groups that had low response rates to requests for demographic information.
Yes, and I think that wording is very specific. So no,
Yep.
You should not be visually identifying anyone. Again, As I stated before, we want to make sure people identify how they so choose. And also visually, if you look at somebody and let's say you capture what you think they are, they can say that you're, again, being discriminatory or file a complaint based on, you classified them as a certain race and they actually weren't. So you just always want to put it back on the participant to tell us what they identify as. And again, if they don't respond or don't want to fill it out, we're not going to penalize you because you asked them and they just didn't want to participate or identify. And that's fine.
Thank you for that. I do think it is a very specific thing that some of us are working with, and thank you for being so crystal clear on that. This is another very specific situation. A program I attended taught by an American Indian said that a lot of tribal members don't want to self-identify as American Indians due to past discrimination. At this meeting, a client I have had contact with for years identified himself as American Indian. When he attends meetings and I distribute cards or polls for virtual meetings and the individual chooses not to self-identify on those cards, how do I record those contacts?
If they're not self-identifying, by written format or electronically in a registration that they are completing, you would say, do not wish to disclose.
I have one more in the chat. What if someone verbally identifies REG information with a staff member?
You have to go back to what documentation do you have? That's hearsay. And you want to make sure that, and I always think of things from a civil rights perspective. Just because someone told me verbally, how can I defend that? They can change their mind and say, I didn't say that. And then, you've already collected it. So again, you just want to say, if somebody's saying verbally what they are, just ask them, do you mind completing out, our REG form? And if they say no, I'm like, okay, thank you, and do not wish to disclose.
Yeah, it was very similar to another pre-submitted question. That is an area where people are very interested. If people do not fill out the survey or the form, can you report the information that has been self-disclosed? So we are hearing a nope, you must have it self-disclosed in writing in some capacity.
Yeah, and I think it's just the understanding of what the REG data is used for. And I don't want you all to feel pressure that, you offer it to them. If they don't respond, that's okay. Instead of, I offered it to them, they didn't answer, how am I going to get it? It's okay if they don't complete it and it's do not wish to disclose. Because when we see those numbers of do not wish to disclose, and if they're a large number, we might just ask some additional questions. What format are you using? Can we come up with some additional strategies? Is there a better communication of why we're collecting it? Things like that. That's what a high number of do not wish to disclose is going to allow us to do, is to work together to think of some additional strategies, not to penalize your program because you have a high number.
Thank you, Drenda. This is another specific one related to non-discrimination agreements. So we are, a program is not requiring third-party organizations where some volunteers volunteer at to sign non-discrimination agreements. Can the program only accept volunteer hours completed at third-party organizations that we know do not discriminate? So I think there's a connection there between, do organizations where volunteers volunteer at, must they be non-discriminatory and must that be in writing?
Well, if there's a known discrimination case, that's that's different. But if you how do you really know someone's not discriminating? That's the first thing. But in those cases, if someone is volunteering at a third party, you don't have to. Again, the written assurances is for the recipients, which is Master Gardener, and any subrecipients and partners. So if the third party is not any one of those entities, you can still count the hours, and you don't have to go and give the insurance to other people. So in that case, you count the hours, but they're not required. to, unless they fall into those categories, subrecipients, partners that have, that you're partnering with in the program, or the actual recipient of the funding.
Okay, and so partner is the like legal designation there. Okay, thank you. Another non-discrimination statement. Do we have to have a specific non-discrimination document, like a standalone document, or can it be included in a code of ethics that volunteers acknowledge and accept? And also, is a one-time signing good, or must this be completed repeatedly at some time interval?
Recommend, if it's like in another document, that it's on a separate page with the signature, so it's clear that that's what the signature is for. And then I would say probably 3 to 4 years to have it re-signed, because you never know, the language might change or something like that, or just to show the recommitment to non-discrimination. So I would say it should really, best practice would be for it to be separated out in a document. It doesn't have to be a separate document, but like a separate page.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ashley, do you have some questions?
Yeah, there's one question about someone was not clear on the significance of the terms subrecipients and partners in relationship to collecting REG data.
Yeah, maybe you all need to explain to me, like, and give me an example of a third party. But so let's say Master Gardeners receiving the funds, they would do the written assurances during the grant award process that's already given. But if there was a program where you had subrecipients of the funding from NIFA, they would sign the written assurances. Partners in regards that have are part of decision making. So let's say if there's an advisory board, things like that. If there's a group that helps maybe decide scholarship funding, if there's some type of assistance there. So that's what a partner would be. Now, if the person you're partnering with, and again, if you're doing a joint event and NIFA's funding is being utilized for that event, then that would be someone that needs to be aware of the written assurances. And I would say you probably have a long-standing relationship with some of these partners. So you probably already have it, which is why we're saying 3 to 4 years, you want to revisit that. But if you can give me another example of what a third party where the volunteers are volunteering at, that would be helpful.
I think an example would be, we have our volunteers and they are volunteering at a botanical garden, for example, and the botanical garden, is not a technical partner, but they are performing volunteer hours at that location. So does that botanical garden, while not legally a partner of the program, do they need to have signed some sort of non-discrimination agreement? Do we need to engage in that way or not?
No, but if the botanical garden had a finding of discrimination, then that might be something you want to do to cover yourself.
Thank you. Ashley, are there any others?
Yeah, this is a fairly long one, but why do we not concern ourselves with their socioeconomic level? It seems we are grouping people by their race, ethnicity, and gender, but the real focus is on whether they receive the proper help through extension. Most of the programs deal with providing food. I hope I'm not out of line with this thought. So folks are just wondering, why not socioeconomic?
Yeah, no, definitely no, you're not out of line with that question. Again, we get guidance on what to collect, but that is something, again, we're not restricting what you all collect in your program. So if you think that's a characteristic or a group that you want to collect information on, you're more than, you can do that. It's just NIFA doesn't require that. So you can always request more information than what our minimum is. And we definitely encourage you to do that, because what's going to happen with the current administration is they're looking at impacts. Where is the government funding going? What communities are being served? Again, socioeconomic, are the programs being offered or the funding going to certain, groups? And so I think that would be something helpful in the future. And one thing NIFA is going to hopefully move for our compliance program is to do an automated way of collecting this information. And that might be a category we want to consider. But again, we're restricted by Office of Management and Budget of what we can collect from, you all, just based on Paper Reduction Act. So again, we're just going by what's already been approved. So yeah, I definitely encourage that because you probably will see some trends.
Great. One more question. If we partner with other organizations and our Master Gardener volunteers do work for them and count volunteer hours, are we expected to ask those organizations to collect REG data for education programs? Like if our MGV is a speaker.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part?
Sure. Like if an MGV is a speaker at a, for instance, a library, would you need to collect the REG data from those educational programs?
I'm just thinking, at the library, is it a reoccurring?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this
like
case,
the library, you go once a year, or is it you're a speaker every other month?
I think there's often a little bit of both going on. Sometimes people will be asked to speak at one organization or maybe regularly with a partner organization.
I have to think about that because again, it's the library. It's not really Master Gardener where people are coming in listening to the speaker. So I would, call that an outreach event where you're just doing the number, not the reg. But let's say if there's a collaboration where every other month at the library, people are registering, those type of things, then yes, I would recommend you collect the reg.
I do want to jump in. It is 2:00 here, and I feel like we could go on for a bit more time here, of course, but I want to respect everybody's time. Drenda, clearly we have more questions. Maybe we can talk about how to follow up with this. But I want to wrap things up right now. And thank you for being so open and frank with us. And I'm sure there were about 60 people in the room, and this was really valuable, a good use of an hour in December. So thank you again. And let's just touch base about perhaps following up. Thank you to everyone, to Kate and to Ashley. And I will turn it over to Nicole. And Delisha left the room. Thank you, Delisha, to wrap things up. But thank you so much, Drenda.
Yes, this was great. You did a fantastic job of just explaining it in plain language. And I think there are some different approaches that we're going to try in our office, but I really am thankful for your time today. And I learned a lot. I'll share that with the volunteers, and I'm sure most folks on the call learned quite a bit too. So as Amy said, we had about 60 folks from 22 different states that put that in the chat box. There are probably more people from other states. But I just want to say thank you. We will record this and post this on the Extension Master Gardener Coordinator social media page, which is the YouTube page. And if you have questions, you can follow up with our speakers specifically. So thank you everyone for your time today. This was an excellent webinar, and have a good holiday.
Hey, Nicole, this is Amy. So are all the questions in the chat, the chat is saved, correct?